Warren Hogan, thanks for your time as always. Now, the Prime Minister this week has been talking about the need for greater economic sovereignty. In your view, what's he talking about there?
Yeah, good morning, Kieran. I think the Prime Minister is referring to effectively self-sufficiency, and that is the ability of Australia to ensure that we have access to critical supplies. And I think the standout through this crisis has been medical supplies and equipment, pharmaceuticals, and I think there's another key industry here being the food and grocery industry. So I think this key concept is around making sure that Australians, whether borders are closed or not, whether international supply chains are disrupted, we can make sure we can get the key things that Australians need. I think there's also an issue here around investment. We've seen some moves from the Foreign Investment Review Board to tighten up on foreign entities coming and buying Australian companies, and I think they're cognizant of the fact that there's distress out there. There could be cheap assets, so they're watching that. But really the main story here is about, as we come out of this, how do we ensure that the new economy is an economy that can make sure it looks after Australia's needs, and I think that means about rebuilding a big part of our manufacturing base.
This week we've seen the passage of the historic JobKeeper legislation, the $130 billion plan. Are you more confident now after that in terms of the jobs outlook?
Certainly am. There's still a lot of uncertainty about how many layoffs, how many businesses have been put into hibernation. But I think the number of Australians whose jobs have been is heavily impacted is well over 1 million and could be 1.5 million. And with this legislation, I'd say about half are remaining connected to their employer. So that's important. It's making sure that they get a basic income, but more importantly, that connection allows for a quick restart of those businesses and, of course, a restart and normalisation of the economy. So this has been really important in keeping that stability and some certainty around the jobs market. We're still going to get some very bad numbers over the next 3 months. I think the unemployment rate will still get to close to 10%, but it could have been a much, much higher figure if we hadn't have had that legislation passed.
And when you talk about such a massive spend, I'm wondering what's your thinking when it comes to the need for an exit strategy from that government support for business?
The government's been really smart in giving some timelines to this, because one of the most difficult things for anyone, whether it's impacted individuals or business, is knowing when things are going to normalise, what's going to happen. And the 6 months was really important as a marker in the sand, so to speak. Whether or not we hit it, whether it's earlier or later, is still subject to uncertainty, and the government admits that. But I think the real issue around the government programs is they can't just stop in 6 months. They need to taper, because if we just stop those programs, whether it be the increase in the job seeker, whether it be the JobKeeper program and the many other programs the government's put in place, we risk just pushing the economic shock or the economic disruption down the track. So we've got to taper these things and start that conversation around what it looks like.
The political rule is never waste a crisis, that governments, policymakers should use this moment to deliver real reform. What sort of changes would you like to see?
Well, the big issue, I think, here is going to be how do we get the economy set to really expand strongly and to employ again over the course of the next 5 years. So how do we use that extra labour that's effectively been put on the sidelines through this economic shock in its most effective way? And I think there's a whole range of programs that the government needs to look at around skills, around retooling our workforce for the new digital age. I think this shock represents a sudden movement to digital awareness in both business and personal life. And I think we really need to make sure our workforce is ready for that. We've been talking about the future of work for a decade, and I think it's here now. And the government needs to facilitate that through institutions in the private sector, through universities, through TAFE and everything. We need to reskill. So I think that's the big one. And then there's going to be an issue of how quickly the government really repairs its budget. I don't think there's a rush on that conversation. I don't think there's a rush in that process, but there's going to be a lot of different views after such an extraordinary government intervention in the economy, there's going to be people who want that out quickly, and there's going to be people who think this is the new operating environment on a more permanent basis. And I think that's a critically important debate over the next 6 to 9 months.
And on that debate, do you see tax reform, increasing the GST, as necessary as part of that budget repair?
It's critical, and you do need to have a view on how quickly we need to get government budgets back in order, and I think there is, as I said, a lot of different views on that. But the tax system is going to have to be utilised to make sure that this economy is operating as efficiently and as effectively as possible. My personal view is that the private sector will lead us out of this downturn, that we will get that labour back into jobs gradually over the next few years, and these new jobs will be really important, really productive, and we can really have a vigorous, healthy economy once again. But we need the tax system to assist that, not hinder that. And it has to be part of some sort of budget repair process. So the GST is certainly, I think, going to be in play here. And I think another reason for that is that state budgets are going to deteriorate significantly through this process. And the GST ultimately is a state tax or revenue source. So I think the GST debate has to be put onto the table.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting, particularly in the context of the National Cabinet, as to how that's handled, given, as you said, the state interests in that, Warren.
And it's a great thing that we've got this National Cabinet, and hopefully it's not just a crisis cabinet. Hopefully this thing can last through the process and help lay the foundations of the recovery. There has been an extraordinary series of events in Australia in the last 4 weeks on the health policy and the economic policy front, and the governments have rallied and done an exceptional job in my view. But we sort of had to act, and we had to act in a crisis environment. It's going to be much trickier to navigate the exit, to navigate the policy shifts, the policy unwind, the new policies we need in place, and being able to have a national cabinet of leaders who take this as seriously as they've taken the last 4 weeks would just do this country so much good on a 10-year, 20-year view. We can lay the foundations to get Australia back to a world-leading position of economic vitality and wealth creation, because we are one of the richest countries in the world.
Yeah, indeed, and if it takes some of the heat out of the politics of things like the GST, that would be such a good thing. Just finally, I'm interested in your view on the international front. Trade links, we're such an open trading nation. How do you see that at the end of all this?
Well, I think the discussion around sovereignty and self-sufficiency is a discussion going on in every country, and every country will have its own vulnerabilities. But there's no doubt that there will be a further impetus given to economic nationalism. We've seen it essentially since the crisis of 2009 slowly emerge. Trump and his tariffs were a highlight in recent years. So we are pausing globalisation. There's no doubt about that. Australia must continue to argue for open trading arrangements. We are critically dependent, particularly in terms of our natural resource exports, on exports. But they're important, and it's a great feature of the Australian economy that we have natural resources, we have energy, and we have food. These are things that other countries need. But we do need an open trading system, and I'm confident that after the political disruptions around this and the arguments that we'll see around the role of trade and globalisation, that we will resume the long upward march of an open trading system. And I think Australia will benefit greatly, continue to benefit greatly from that.